What's the penalty for crossing a border unlawfully?
I would defer to the Department of Justice on any.
Well, let's try it this way. Who has exclusive jurisdiction over immigration cases?
Again, it's outside of my lane, but I would say it's CBP or ICE.
So it'd be federal. It's exclusively federal.
Yes, sir.
Both, and they're really, unless you can think of something I can't think of, it's either crossing a border unlawfully or overstaying a visa would be about the only ways you could get in the country unlawfully. Only two ways I can think of. You either cross one of our territorial boundaries or you're invited in and you overstay your visa. And those are both exclusively federal. But I think you'll agree with me that almost all of our interactions in life are with state and local law enforcement. It's not an FBI agent who stops us for speeding. It's not an ATF agent who is working the bar scene. So if most of our citizen police encounters are state and local, and yet immigration is exclusively federal, how are the federal officers supposed to know about folks who are not here lawfully?
Sir, the Department of Homeland Security has the PEP program, which I am not at liberty to speak on. But I would say if Congress passed a law that commandeered every local police officer and wanted to pay for that, then I think we would welcome it.
When you say, well, commandeer is such a pejorative word, how about we just say cooperate? I mean, you don't commandeer people for your terrorism task forces, do you? You don't commandeer people for your narcotics task forces, do you? It's called cooperation. And yet you have a policy that says that New Orleans Police Department members shall not make inquiries into an individual's immigration status. What do you mean by inquiries?
Sir, if there's a criminal in New Orleans and an officer interacts with that person and there's a criminal warrant, that person
See, I don't know what you mean by criminal. You mean if the person has, if there's probable cause to believe that an offense was committed, or if there's already an outstanding warrant?
If there's a state, federal, or local warrant or probable cause that an officer observes conduct that's criminal, they will arrest the person.
All right, and then they can inquire as to the person's status.
Our officers under this policy do not inquire about a person's immigration status.
They can or cannot?
Under this policy, they do not inquire about a person's immigration status.
Why not?
Because we believe that, one, this follows federal law, and two...
How are the federal law enforcement officers supposed to know who is here unlawfully if your officers don't inquire? They're not the ones that are interacting with them. They're not enforcing traffic laws. They don't respond to domestic violence calls. The FBI doesn't have jurisdiction over that. That would be your state and local officers. So how is that supposed to happen?
Sir, I think your concerns are with the broader system and not with this policy. In New Orleans, we arrest every criminal that we interact with. We bring them to the jail.
I love the way you phrase that. You arrest every criminal you interact with. They're only a criminal after they've had a jury trial, Mr. Butterworth. They're a suspect up until that point.
Correct.
Mr. Horowitz, if their original policy was okay, why did they revise it?
I don't know the answer to that question, Mr. Chairman. You'd have to ask the Civil Rights Division.
Well, you're a good lawyer, Mr. Horowitz. If the original contract was fine, you usually don't draft another one unless you just love paying lawyers. I mean, if your original indictment was okay, did you have a superseding indictment?
Generally not.
No, you don't. So if the original policy is fine, why did we get this brand new policy?
Well, obviously our memorandum outlining the concerns we had about the provision that then existed may well have triggered the revisions.
I hate to be cynical, but I think you're right. Ms. Gupta, you said you were a prosecutor. There was a question I got way back in time that I never really had a good answer for. Whenever a family member who had lost a loved one to an act of violence to someone who was out on bond would ask me, why was that person out of jail? I never really had a good answer. I mean, you can cite the Constitution that you're really entitled to bond absent some circumstances, but that's kind of a hollow explanation. So what would the explanation be to those who have lost loved ones to violent crime for people who are here unlawfully, and the federal government knows it.
There is, for somebody who's been accused of a violent crime, the NOPD is absolutely entitled and in its authority to prosecute to the law to the fullest. And there's nothing in this policy.
You're either missing my point inadvertently or you're missing my point intentionally. I realize you prosecute people after the homicide. I'm trying to figure out how to prevent the homicide. What is the explanation for why the person wasn't dealt with before the murder?
Well, let me just, again, make clear that the reason we undertook the policy was to ensure that NOPD could fight violent crime, could get the kind of critical information from victims and witnesses who need to share critical crime information with the NOPD in order to solve and prevent violent crime in that
Well, Ms. Gupta,
jurisdiction.
you and I both know that we rely on all sorts of witnesses, some of whom, frankly, expose themselves to criminal liability in the process of cooperating. So the notion that you have to give amnesty to people before they will cooperate with law enforcement has not been my experience. But Attorney General Landry, I'm out of time. You asked the question, how do you answer it when family members ask you, why was this person not dealt with before they committed the act of violence? I never really had a good answer to that one.
Unfortunately, I've had to answer that question in Louisiana here lately. And the best way I answer them is that our system in this country is broken.